Nia Carter stood in the Carverton courtroom, wrists bruised from cuffs, her tailored grey suit wrinkled after a night in jail. Officers Brent Hollis and Kyle Vance snickered from the prosecution table, whispering slurs, assuming she was a nobody. The judge banged the gavel, sentencing her for obstructing justice in a lightning-fast ruling. Reporters gasped. Nia's eyes glinted with defiance as she was led away, a cryptic smirk flickering. She was the head of Homeland Security, and this sham conviction would unleash chaos. What would her next move spark? Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from, and if you stand for justice against corruption, hit like and subscribe for more explosive stories. Nia Carter stepped onto the cracked pavement of Carverton's east side, her low heels clicking against the uneven ground as the late afternoon sun cast long shadows over the row houses. She adjusted her navy blazer, her sharp eyes scanning the street. This wasn't a casual stroll. She was here incognito, scouting for a federal sting operation targeting a drug ring the Carverton Police Department had conveniently ignored for years. Her role as head of Homeland Security demanded discretion, and today she blended in, just another black woman in a neighborhood worn thin by neglect. Kids darted between stoops, their laughter a fleeting reprieve from the tension that hung thick in the air. She noted the boarded windows, the graffiti scrawled in jagged loops, and the faint hum of a police scanner crackling from somewhere nearby. This was a place where trust in uniforms had long since eroded, and Nia knew why. She'd seen the reports, the complaints buried under bureaucratic red tape, the lives chewed up by a system that thrived on turning a blind eye. Her mission was to cut through that rot, but she hadn't expected to stumble into it so soon. 3 blocks in, she spotted trouble brewing. A skinny teenage boy, no older than 15, stood pinned against a chain-link fence by 2 cops. His backpack lay spilled open on the ground, notebooks and a cracked phone scattered like casualties. Officer. Brent Hollis loomed over him, a hulking figure with a buzz cut and a sneer that twisted his sunburned face into something predatory. His partner, Kyle Vance, leaned against their cruiser, younger but no less menacing, his wiry frame coiled with restless energy. Hollis barked something Nia couldn't quite catch, but the kid's wide eyes and trembling hands told her enough. He was scared, and they were enjoying it. She slowed her pace, her pulse quickening as she weighed her options. She could walk away, keep her cover, let the sting play out later. But then Hollis grabbed the boy's collar, yanking him forward, so hard his feet stumbled, and Nia's resolve hardened. She'd spent decades climbing the ranks to stop scenes like this, and she wasn't about to let it slide, cover or not. She strode forward, her voice cutting through the humid air like a blade. "What's he done?" she asked, keeping her tone even but firm. Hollis froze, his meaty hand still gripping the kid, and turned his head slowly, as if annoyed by the interruption. Vance straightened, his lips curling into a smirk as he sized her up. Up close, she saw the sweat beading on Hollis's forehead, the faint stubble shadowing Vance's jaw, the way their badges glinted like trophies they didn't deserve. "Mind? Your business, lady," Hollis growled, his voice gravelly with contempt. "He's loitering, causing trouble. You want to join him?" Nia didn't flinch. She met his glare, her dark eyes steady, and took a step closer. "Doesn't look like trouble to me. Looks like a kid trying to get home. You got a reason to rough him up, or is this just your idea of a good time?" The air shifted, thick with unspoken menace. Hollis released the boy, who scrambled back, clutching his bag. Vance stepped forward, his smirk widening into something uglier. "Oh, we got an uppity one here," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "You think you can just waltz up and question us? People like you don't get how this works." Nia's jaw tightened, but she kept her composure, years of training holding her steady. She knew what people like you meant, had heard it flung at her since she was a girl in South Carolina, watching cops harass her neighbors for sport. "I'm asking a simple question," she said, her words clipped. "If you've got no answer, maybe you should let him go." Hollis laughed, a harsh barking sound that echoed off the brick walls. "Hear that, Kyle? She's giving us orders now. Guess we better bow down to the queen of the block." The kid bolted, vanishing around a corner, and Nia felt a flicker of relief. She'd bought him time, at least. But Hollis wasn't done. He closed the gap between them, towering over her, his breath sour with coffee and spite. "You're real. Mouthy for someone who don't belong here," he said, his eyes narrowing. "Maybe you need a lesson in respect." Nia held her ground, her mind racing. She could flash her credentials, end this now, but that would blow her cover, unravel months of work. She opted for a warning instead, her voice low and deliberate. "You don't want to push this, officer. Trust me." Vance snorted, stepping beside Hollis. "Push what? You threatening us, huh? Big mistake." Before she could react, Vance lunged, his hands snatching her wrists with surprising speed. She twisted, instinct kicking in, but he was stronger than he looked. Metal bit into her skin as he snapped cuffs around her wrists, yanking her arms. Behind her back. "You're under arrest," he spat, his breath hot against her ear. "Obstructing an investigation. Should have kept walking." Nia's heart pounded, but she forced herself to stay calm even as Hollis shoved her toward the cruiser. Her shoulder slammed against the door, pain flaring down her arm, and she stumbled, her knees scraping the pavement. "Get her in," Hollis barked, and Vance hauled her up, slamming her chest first against the hood. The impact knocked the wind from her. Her cheek pressed to the warm metal as Vance tightened the cuffs until her fingers tingled. Hollis leaned in close, his voice a venomous whisper. "You think you're tough, huh? Just another loudmouth who don't know her place." He stepped back, then spat, a wet glob landing on her polished shoes. Nia's stomach churned, rage simmering beneath her calm exterior, but she bit her tongue. She'd dealt with worse, and she knew how to play the long game. Vance chuckled, opening the cruiser door. "Look at her, Brent. She's shaking. Bet she's regretting opening that mouth now." Nia wasn't shaking, not from fear. It was fury, coiled tight, waiting for release. She glanced up, catching sight of a small crowd gathering across the street. Phones were out, red lights blinking as they recorded. Good, she thought, evidence. But then Hollis noticed too. "Give me those," he roared, charging toward the onlookers. A woman shrieked as he snatched her phone, smashing it against the curb. Vance followed, grabbing another device from a teenage girl who yelped and darted back. The crowd scattered, but not before a few clips were saved, destined to spread. Nia filed that away, a lifeline she'd use later. For now she was alone, shoved into the cruiser's back seat, the vinyl sticky against her palms. The door slammed, locking her in with the stale smell of sweat and cigarette smoke. Hollis climbed into the driver's seat, glaring at her through the rearview mirror. "You just made a big mistake, sweetheart," he said, starting the engine. "We run this town, not you." Vance slid in beside him, cracking his knuckles. "She'll learn quick. They always do." Nia met their gazes, her expression unreadable. She wasn't some civilian they could break. She was the head of Homeland Security, and they'd just ignited a war they couldn't win. But she'd underestimated. Them too assumed her status would shield her once she made a call. As the cruiser peeled away, tires squealing, she realized they weren't taking her straight to booking. The precinct was north. They were heading west toward the industrial sprawl where abandoned lots stretched for miles. Her gut tightened. This wasn't just an arrest, it was personal. They pulled into an alley, the cruiser jolting over potholes. Hollis cut the engine, and both cops stepped out, their silhouettes dark against the fading light. Vance opened her door, grabbing her arm and yanking her onto the gravel. "Out!" he snapped, shoving her forward. Nia stumbled but caught herself, her shoes crunching on broken glass. Hollis circled her, his sneer back in full force. "Thought you were smart, huh? Interfering with us? Let's see how smart you feel now." He nodded to Vance, who pulled a baton from his belt, twirling it with a grin. Nia braced herself, her mind racing for an exit. She could fight, maybe take one down, but cuffed and outnumbered, her odds were slim. Vance swung, the D baton whistling through the air, aimed at her ribs. She dodged, twisting sideways, and the blow grazed her hip, sending a jolt of pain through her. Hollis laughed, clapping his hands. "She's quick. Too bad it won't help." Nia glared at them, her voice steady despite the ache. "You're digging your own graves. Stop now and you might still walk away from this." Vance paused, then swung again, harder, catching her shoulder. She grunted, staggering back but didn't fall. Hollis stepped closer, his breath rancid. "Graves, nah, you're the one who's finished. They dragged her back to the cruiser, tossing her inside like a rag doll. The ride to the precinct was silent, save for their occasional chuckles. Nia's mind churned. She'd assumed a quick release once Marcus, her lawyer, got involved. She'd call him, flash her credentials, and this would end. But as they pulled into the station, Hollis turned, his eyes glinting with malice. "Paperwork's gonna take a while," he said. "Real long while." Nia's heart sank. They weren't just holding her. They were burying her, and she hadn't seen it coming. This was only the beginning. Nia Carter sat on the edge of a rusted cot, in a Carverton precinct holding cell, the damp concrete walls pressing in like a vice. The air stank of mildew and despair, a faint drip echoing from a leaking pipe somewhere in the dark. Her wrists ached from the cuffs now removed, leaving red welts that pulsed with every heartbeat. She flexed her fingers, trying to shake the numbness, but her mind was sharper than ever, slicing through the haze of the past few hours. She'd been hauled in after that alley beating, her blazer torn at the shoulder, her dignity battered but intact. This wasn't her first brush with petty tyrants hiding behind badges, but it was the first time she'd been this deep in their grip. She'd assumed her arrest was a fluke, a quick detour she'd unravel with a phone call. Now, sitting in this dank hole, she wasn't so sure. Footsteps clacked down the hall, heavy and deliberate, and Nia's ears pricked up. She straightened, smoothing her wrinkled suit as best she could, her posture a silent defiance. Through the bars, she caught muffled voices, low and conspiratorial. It was Brent Hollis and Kyle Vance, the two cops who'd turned her day into a nightmare. Hollis's gravelly tone carried through the steel. "Got the stuff from that raid last week," he muttered, a smirk audible in his words. "Plenty to pin on her. No one's going to care if it's clean or not." Vance chuckled, his voice sharp with glee. "She'll wish she'd kept her nose out of our business." "What's the play?" Hollis paused, then said, "Drugs. Small baggy. Just enough to make it stick. Obstruction's weak, but possession, that's a lock." Nia's blood ran cold. They weren't just holding her. They were framing her, building a cage she'd never see coming. She clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms. She'd spent her career dismantling setups like this, exposing dirty cops who thought they could bury the truth under lies. As head of Homeland Security, she had the power to crush them. But right now, stripped of her phone and credentials, she was just another black woman in their crosshairs. The irony stung. She'd walked into Carverton to clean up their mess, and now they were painting her as the criminal. Her mind raced, piecing together a plan. Marcus Tate, her lawyer, would be here soon. He'd tear through their flimsy story. Get her out. She just had to hold on. But then the cell door rattled and a guard tossed her purse onto the floor, the zipper half open. Nia's gut twisted. She hadn't carried anything incriminating, just her wallet, keys, and a notepad. She snatched it up, rifling through, and froze. Nestled between her belongings was a small plastic baggie, stuffed with white powder. Her breath caught. They'd planted it, right under her nose. The door clanged shut, and Nia's heart thudded against her ribs. She shoved the baggie deep into her pocket, her mind spinning. She could ditch it, flush it down the filthy toilet in the corner, but if they searched her again, they'd claim she'd hidden it. No, she'd keep it, use it as proof of their setup once Marcus got here. She paced the cell, 3 steps 1. Way 3 back, her shoes scuffing the grime. Minutes stretched into an hour, then 2. Finally, the door swung open, and Marcus Tate stormed in, his silver hair glinting under the flickering bulb. He was a wiry man in his 60s, all sharp angles and sharper wit, his pinstripe suit a stark contrast to the cell's decay. "Nia, what the hell happened?" he demanded, his voice a low growl. She met his gaze, steady despite the chaos. "They jumped me. Harassed a kid, I stepped in. Now they're framing me with this." She pulled the baggie from her pocket, holding it up like a grenade. Marcus's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening as he took it, slipping it into his briefcase. Planted. Figures. These clowns think they're untouchable. He banged on the bars, summoning the guard. "I want her processed out now. This is a disgrace." The guard, a doughy man with a lazy sneer, shuffled off, muttering under his breath. Nia leaned closer to Marcus, her voice a whisper. "They're not just sloppy, Marcus. They're bragging about it. I heard them. Drugs from a raid, pinned. On me?" Marcus nodded, his expression grim. I'll get you out, then we'll bury them. Your position gives us leverage they can't imagine." Nia exhaled, a flicker of hope igniting. She'd assumed her release would be swift once Marcus flexed his legal muscle. She was wrong. The guard returned, flanked by Hollis and Vance. Hollis leaned against the bars, his bulk filling the frame, while Vance hovered behind, cracking his knuckles. "Problem, counselor?" Hollis asked, his tone mockingly polite. Marcus squared his shoulders. "You're holding my client on a sham charge. Let her go, or I'll have this precinct crawling with feds by morning." Vance laughed, a high, grating sound. "Feds? For her? Good luck with that." Hollis smirked, pulling out his phone and dialing. He put it on speaker, the line crackling, as a desk sergeant picked up. "Yeah, Sarge, we got a troublemaker here. Obstruction, possession, paperwork's filed. She's staying put." Nia's stomach dropped. The sergeant's voice droned back, bored and complicit. "Got it. Booked." And locked. "Tell her lawyer to take a hike." Hollis hung up, grinning. "See? System's ours. She ain't going nowhere." Marcus's face reddened, but he kept his cool, turning to Nia. "They're stalling. I'll file an emergency motion. Sit tight." He stormed out, leaving Nia alone with the cops. Hollis stepped closer, his breath sour as he leaned in. "No one believes your kind, sweetheart." "You're done," Vance chimed in, his voice a taunt. "Heard you crying for your lawyer. Pathetic." Nia stared them down, her silence a weapon. She wasn't crying. She was plotting. Hours later, Marcus returned, triumphant. "Motion's through. You're out on bail." Nia walked free, the precinct's fluorescent glare stinging her eyes as she stepped into the night. She hugged Marcus, relief washing over her. "Thanks. I thought I'd dodged the worst." She'd misjudged again. As they reached his car, Nia's phone buzzed, a notification lighting up the screen. She tapped it and her blood ran cold. A video was trending online, already at 50,000 views. It showed her arrest but twisted beyond recognition. The footage was choppy, edited to make her look wild, lunging at Vance as he cuffed her. Her voice was dubbed over, shouting curses she'd never said. The caption screamed in bold, "Thug." "Attacks cops in broad daylight." Comments poured in, venomous and relentless. "Typical," one read. "Jail her for life," said another. Nia's hands shook, rage and disbelief warring inside her. "They doctored it," she whispered, showing Marcus. He cursed under his breath. "They're not just framing you, they're lynching you in public." She scrolled further, spotting a news ticker. "Carverton woman arrested after violent. Clash with police." The story painted her as a drug-addled menace, a threat to order. Protesters were already gathering downtown, some waving signs calling her a hero, others branding her a criminal. Nia's chest tightened. She'd thought, exposing the edit would clear her name, that her release was the end of it. But Hollis and Vance had planned deeper, turning her into a pariah before she could fight back. The precinct loomed behind her, a hulking shadow in the dark, and she realized this wasn't just a personal vendetta. It was a war, and they'd fired the first real shot. She'd underestimated their reach, their ruthlessness. What would they twist next to keep her buried? Drop a comment with the number 1 if you think Nia's right to suspect these cops are just getting started. Hit like if you're rooting for her to turn the tables, and subscribe to catch how she fights back. Ever wonder how far someone will go to silence the truth? What happens when Nia's next move catches them off guard? Nia Carter stood at the defendant's table in the Carverton courthouse, her grey suit pressed, but her wrist still shadowed with faint bruises from the cuffs. The room buzzed with restless energy, a sea of faces packed into the gallery. There whispers a low hum beneath the creak of wooden benches. Reporters lined the back wall, pens poised over notepads, cameras trained on her like vultures circling a kill. The towering windows let in slants of morning light, glinting off the polished floor. But the air felt heavy, thick with anticipation and something darker. Nia's trial had begun, and the city was watching, split between those who saw her as a victim and those who'd swallowed the viral lie branding her a thug. She kept her chin high, her dark eyes steady, but inside, her pulse thrummed with a mix of fury and resolve. She'd assumed her arrest was a hurdle she'd clear with Marcus. Tate's legal firepower, now staring down a courtroom rigged against her. She wasn't so sure. Across the room, officers Brent Hollis and Kyle Vance strutted in, their uniforms crisp, badges gleaming like medals they hadn't earned. Hollis's broad shoulders rolled. With every step, his buzz-cut head tilted back in a swagger that screamed confidence. Vance followed, his wiry frame buzzing with nervous energy, a smirk tugging at his lips as he shot Nia a sidelong glance. They settled at the prosecution table, elbows propped casually, as if this were a game they'd already won. Nia caught Hollis whispering something to Vance, both of them snickering, their eyes darting to her with undisguised contempt. She clenched her jaw, forcing herself to stay calm. They thought she was nothing, just another black woman they could crush under their boots. Soon they'd learn how wrong they were. She had an ace up her sleeve, her role as head of Homeland Security. It was a bomb she'd drop when the moment was right, and it would blow their smug world apart. The prosecutor, Lisa Dunn, rose from her seat, a tall woman in her 40s with a sleek blonde bob and a voice that cut through the room like a razor. She adjusted her glasses, her heels clicking as she approached the jury box. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her tone smooth but edged with disdain, "you're here to judge a clear case of lawlessness. Nia Carter, the defendant, isn't a victim. She's a menace who assaulted 2 dedicated officers in broad daylight, obstructing a critical investigation." Nia's stomach twisted as Dunn spun her tale, painting her as a wild aggressor, a threat to Carverton's peace. "You've seen the video," Dunn continued, gesturing to a screen where the doctored footage waited. She lunged at officers. "Hollis and Vance resisted arrest and endangered our community. We'll prove she's guilty beyond doubt." The jury, 12 men and women with tired eyes and stiff postures, nodded faintly, some scribbling notes, others staring at Nia with thinly veiled suspicion. Dunn called her first witness, a scruffy man named Eddie Grimes, who claimed he'd seen the whole thing. He shuffled to the stand, his stained jacket reeking of stale beer as he swore in. "Yeah, I was there," he mumbled, scratching his neck. "She came out of nowhere, yelling at the cops, swinging her arms. Looked like she wanted to fight." Nia's fists tightened under the table. She'd never seen this man in her life, and she hadn't swung at anyone. Marcus leaned over, his voice a whisper. "He's lying. Probably paid off." Nia nodded, her mind racing. She'd intervened to protect a kid, not start a brawl. But Grimes's words landed like blows, and the jury's faces hardened, a few glancing at her with disgust. Dunn followed with another witness, a middle-aged woman named Clara Pitts, who parroted the same story, her voice trembling with rehearsed fear. "She shoved Officer Vance. I thought she'd hurt him." Nia's chest burned. The lies were piling up, a wall she couldn't break through yet. Marcus Tate stood, his silver hair catching the light as he faced the jury. He moved with the grace of a seasoned fighter, his pinstripe suit sharp against the courtroom's muted tones. "The prosecution wants you to believe a fiction," he said, his voice steady and warm, like a father setting the record straight. "Nia Carter didn't attack anyone. She questioned an unjust stop and these officers turned on her. We'll prove it." He called his first witness, a teenage girl named Tamika Jones, one of the bystanders from that day. She took the stand, her braids swaying as she fidgeted, her eyes darting to Hollis and Vance. "I saw it all," she said, her voice small but firm. "Ms. Carter asked why they were messing with that boy. They got mad, started yelling names, at her, real nasty stuff. Then they cuffed her. She didn't fight." Marcus nodded, pacing. "What names, Tamika?" She hesitated, then whispered. "Called her trash. Said she didn't belong. Worse stuff, too." A murmur rippled through the gallery, but the jury stayed stone-faced. Nia watched Tamika, her heart swelling with gratitude. Here was truth, raw and unpolished, cutting through the prosecution's gloss. Marcus pressed on, calling another witness, an older man named Leroy Banks, who'd filmed part of the arrest before his phone was smashed. "She was calm," Leroy said, his gravelly voice steady. "They pushed her first. I got it on video till they broke my screen." Marcus held up the shattered device, its cracked glass glinting. "This is what they do to evidence," he told the jury. "They silence it." Nia felt a spark of hope. She had Marcus, she had witnesses, and soon she'd have her title. She leaned over, whispering to him. "Tell them who I am. It'll change everything." Marcus squeezed her hand, nodding. Soon. Let's build the case first. She trusted him, believing her reveal would flip the trial in her favor. She'd miscalculated. The judge, Harold Kent, banged his gavel, a grizzled man in his 70s with a face carved from years on the force before the bench. His black robe hung heavy, his thin lips curling as he glared at Marcus. Enough grandstanding. Counselor, he snapped, his voice a low rumble. Your witnesses sound like troublemakers stirring the pot. Stick to facts, not sob stories. Nia's hope flickered. Kent's bias was blatant, his past as a cop bleeding into every word. He cut Marcus off mid-sentence, dismissing Leroy's testimony as hearsay, despite the broken phone in evidence. Tamika's account was waved away as unreliable, Kent sneering that kids exaggerate. The jury shifted, some frowning, but most nodded along, swayed by the judge's authority. Nia's stomach sank. This wasn't justice. It was a machine, oiled by prejudice, grinding her down. Dunn seized the moment, replaying the doctored video. The screen flickered to life, showing Nia's arrest in distorted fragments. Her body jerked forward in the edit, looking like a lunge, her dubbed voice snarling threats. The crowd gasped and Hollis leaned back, his smirk widening. Vance tapped his fingers on the table, eyes glinting with triumph. Dunn turned to the jury. This is who she is. Violent, defiant, a danger. The evidence speaks. Marcus objected, shouting that the footage was tampered with, but Kent overruled him, banging the gavel so hard the wood creaked. Order. The video's admissible. Move on. Nia's hands trembled, rage boiling beneath her calm facade. She'd seen corruption before, but this was a circus, every ringmaster in on the act. The trial sped forward, a blur of lies and interruptions. Marcus fought, but Kent blocked every move, his rulings a brick wall. By noon, Dunn rested her case, her smile tight with victory. Marcus scrambled, his last witness cut off mid-testimony. Kent called for closing arguments, his tone impatient. Dunn went first, her words dripping with condescension. Nia Carter broke the law, attacked our officers, and deserves punishment, Marcus countered, his voice rising with passion. This is a setup, a disgrace to justice. Look at the truth, not their lies. Nia watched the jury, searching for cracks in their resolve. She saw flickers of doubt, but not enough. Kent leaned forward, his glasses glinting. Jury, deliberate, make it quick. They filed out and Nia's chest tightened. She'd assumed her Homeland Security role would sway them once Marcus dropped it, but he'd held back, waiting for the perfect strike. Now time was slipping away. The jury returned in under an hour, a record that chilled her bones. The foreman, a balding man with a pinched face, stood. We find the defendant guilty of obstructing justice. The gallery erupted, cheers clashing with groans. Hollis winked at Nia, a slow, deliberate taunt as Vance clapped him on the back. Kent banged the gavel, sentencing her on the spot. 30 days, Carverton Women's Jail, next case. Nia's knees buckled, but she caught herself. Shock, numbing her rage. She'd thought federal pressure would overturn this farce. As guards cuffed her again, Hollis's wink burned into her. They had more planned, and she'd walked right into it. Nia Carter stepped off the rattling prison bus into the shadow of Carverton Women's Jail. Her grey suit swapped for a threadbare orange jumpsuit that hung loose on her frame. The air hit her like a slap, thick with the stench of bleach and desperation, as guards barked orders over the clang of metal gates. Her wrists were cuffed again, the steel cold against her bruised skin, and her shoes scuffed the chipped concrete as they marched her inside. The building loomed, a grey fortress of cracked walls and barred windows, its corridors echoing with shouts and the distant wail of a siren. Nia kept her head up, her dark eyes scanning the faces around her, inmates and guards alike. She'd been sentenced to 30 days, a sham conviction she'd overturn once her team got wind of it. But as the heavy door slammed shut behind her, sealing her in, a chill snaked down her spine. This wasn't just a jail. It was a trap. And Hollis and Vance had built it. The intake process was a blur of humiliation. A guard with a buzz cut and a lazy drawl shoved her against a wall, her palms splaying against the rough plaster as he patted her down. "Spread 'em," he grunted, his hands lingering too long, his breath hot with tobacco. Another guard, a wiry woman with a scar slicing her cheek, ripped through Naya's belongings, tossing her wallet and keys into a bin with a smirk. "Fancy lady, huh? Not here." They stripped her bare, the cold air biting her skin as they hosed her down, water stinging her eyes. She clenched her teeth, swallowing the rage that bubbled up. "Move it," the scarred guard snapped, thrusting the jumpsuit at her. Nia dressed, the fabric scratching her flesh, and they shoved her into a holding room. She wasn't alone. 2 other women sat there, one muttering to herself, the other glaring at Nia with hollow eyes. The guards knew who she was, she realized. Hollis and Vance's cronies ran this place, and they'd made sure everyone did. They locked her in solitary, a 6x8 cell with a cot that sagged under a stained mattress and a toilet that reeked of rust and worse. The door clanged shut, the sound reverberating in her skull, and darkness swallowed her, save for a sliver of light creeping under the frame. Nia paced, her bare feet slapping the icy floor, her mind racing. She'd survived the trial, clung to the belief that her position as head of Homeland Security would pull her out. Now, trapped in this hole, she needed a lifeline. She banged on the door, her fist thudding against steel. "I need a phone call," she shouted, her voice steady, but edged with urgency. No answer. She banged again, harder, until her knuckles ached. Finally, the buzzcut guard appeared, his silhouette filling the slot. "Shut up," he snarled. "You don't get calls in here." Nia stared him down. "I know my rights. Get me a phone or you'll regret it." He laughed, a wet, guttural sound, and slammed the slot shut. Hours passed, or maybe days, time blurring in the dimness. Nia sat on the cot, her back against the wall, plotting. She'd get word to Lena Price, her deputy at Homeland Security. Lena was a bulldog, fiercely loyal, and she'd tear Carverton apart to free her. But Nia needed a way out first. Then it came, a stroke of luck in the chaos. A new guard, a young woman with nervous eyes, slipped in during a shift change. She carried a tray of grey slop, her hands trembling as she slid it through the slot. Nia spotted the bulge in her pocket, a phone peeking out. "Hey," Nia whispered, keeping her voice low. "I need that. Just for a minute. Please." The guard hesitated, glancing over her shoulder, then nodded once, quick and sharp. She passed it through, her fingers brushing Nia's. "Make it fast," she muttered, then stepped back. Nia's heart pounded as she dialed Lena, the line crackling before her deputy's voice cut through. "Nia, where the hell are you?" Nia kept it brief, her words clipped. "Carverton Women's Jail, framed by Hollis and Vance. Start a federal probe now." "They're not done with me." Lena cursed, her tone fierce. "I'm on it. Hang tight." The call ended, the guard snatching the phone back, her eyes wide with fear. "Don't tell," she whispered, then fled. Nia exhaled, a flicker of triumph, warming her chest. She'd gotten through. Lena would move mountains, and soon this nightmare would crack open. She leaned against the wall, closing her eyes, believing she'd outmaneuvered them. She hadn't. Word spread fast in a place like this, whispers snaking through the bars. By nightfall, the guards knew she'd made a call. Nia heard them outside her cell, their voices low and venomous. "She's stirring shit," one said, his tone thick with malice. "Boss says handle it." Nia's eyes snapped open, her pulse spiking. Boss meant Hollis or Vance or someone higher pulling strings. She stood, bracing herself, as the cell door rattled. It didn't open. Instead, a key turned. Elsewhere, a distant clank echoing down the hall. Then chaos erupted. Shouts exploded from the main block, feet pounding, metal crashing against metal. A riot. Nia pressed herself to the wall, listening as the noise swelled, a tide of violence rushing closer. The door flew open, but no guard stepped through. 3 inmates stormed in, their jumpsuits stained with sweat and blood, their eyes wild. The leader, a stocky woman with a shaved head and a jagged scar across her lip, gripped a shiv, its blade glinting in the faint light. "You're the snitch," she hissed, her voice a growl. "Cops paid us good to shut you up." Nia's stomach dropped. Hollis and Vance had orchestrated this, turned the jail into a kill zone. She raised her hands, her voice calm despite the adrenaline flooding her veins. "You don't want this, they're using you." The woman sneered, lunging, the shiv slashing toward Nia's gut. Nia sidestepped, years of training kicking in, and grabbed the woman's wrist, twisting until the blade clattered to the floor. The other two charged, fists flying, one wielding a broken pipe. Nia ducked a swing, the pipe grazing her scalp, and drove her elbow into the second inmate's nose. Bone crunched, blood spraying, and the woman staggered back, howling. The third grabbed Nia's hair, yanking hard, but Nia spun, slamming her heel into the attacker's knee. A sickening pop echoed, and the woman crumpled, screaming. The leader scrambled for the shiv, her scar twisting as she lunged again. Nia caught her arm, flipping her onto the cot with a thud that shook the frame. Breathing hard, Nia kicked the shiv under the toilet, her chest heaving as the riot's roar pulsed outside. Blood trickled from a cut on her cheek, her jumpsuit. Torn at the shoulder, but she was alive. She'd fought them off, her body aching but unbroken. She sank to the floor, thinking she'd survived the worst. She was wrong again. Footsteps thundered down the hall, boots on concrete, and the buzz-cut guard burst in, his face red with fury. "What the hell happened here?" he roared, his eyes darting to the groaning inmates. Nia stood, wiping blood from her lip, her voice steady. "They attacked me. You let them in." He smirked, a cruel glint in his eyes. "Attack? Looks like you started it." He grabbed her arm, dragging her out as more guards swarmed, batons raised. They hauled her to the warden's office, a cramped room stinking of cigars and leather. The warden, a squat man with a bald head and a permanent scowl, sat behind a desk piled with papers. "Carter," he spat, his voice oily. "You're trouble. Riots on you. 3 inmates down, 1 dead from the chaos. Guess who's taking the fall?" Nia's heart sank, her triumph shattering. "Dead?" she whispered, dread coiling in her gut. The warden nodded, his lips curling. "Stabbed in the block. Your fault, they'll say. You're not walking out of this." Nia's knees weakened, but she held his gaze, realizing Hollis and Vance had planned this too. She'd fought to survive, thinking she'd won a battle, only to be handed a bigger war. They'd turned her victory into a noose, and it was tightening fast. Drop a comment with the number 1 if you think Nia's fight was badass. Hit like if you're furious at these corrupt guards, and subscribe to see her next move against this nightmare. Can Nia outsmart a system that's rigged her to fail, or will the next blow bury her deeper? Nia Carter sat in a stark interrogation room at Carverton Women's Jail, her orange jumpsuit stained with blood from the riot, the metallic tang still lingering in her nose. The walls were a dull grey, scratched with years of despair, and a single bulb buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across her bruised face. Her hands rested on the cold steel table, uncuffed for now, but her wrists throbbed with phantom pressure from the night before. Across from her, the warden leaned back in his chair, his bald head gleaming under the light, his small eyes glinting. With malice, he tapped a file against the table, the sound a slow, deliberate taunt. "You're in deep now, Carter," he said, his voice thick with satisfaction. 1 dead inmate, 3 in the infirmary. All because of you." Nia's chest tightened, her mind racing to piece together the chaos. She'd fought off an attack, survived a setup by Hollis and Vance's cronies, but this was bigger, darker, a noose tightening around her neck. He slid the file toward her, flipping it open to reveal a grainy photo. A woman, mid-30s, lay, sprawled on the cell block floor, her jumpsuit soaked crimson, a jagged wound gaping in her chest. Nia's stomach lurched. She didn't recognize her, hadn't seen her in the riot. "Who's this?" she asked, her voice steady despite the dread creeping up her spine. The warden smirked, his lips curling like a predator savoring a kill. "Name's Tanya Reed. Stabbed during your little uprising. Guess what we found?" He pulled out a plastic evidence bag, dangling it between his fingers. Inside was a shiv, its blade crusted with dried blood, and Nia's breath caught as he added, "Your prints are all over it." Her heart slammed against her ribs. She'd kicked a shiv under the toilet in her cell, but she hadn't touched it, not like that. "That's impossible," she said, her tone icy. "You planted it." The warden chuckled, a low, guttural sound that echoed in the cramped space. "Planted? Nah. You're a fighter, Carter. Everyone saw you take down those girls. Easy to believe you'd stab one too. Nia's fists clenched under the table, her nails digging into her palms. She'd survived the ambush, thought she'd outlasted their first move, but Hollis and Vance had twisted it into something lethal. They'd bribed those inmates to attack her, and now they'd pinned a murder on her using her own defense against her. The warden leaned forward, his breath sour with coffee. "You're looking at life, sweetheart. No bail this time. No fancy lawyer's gonna save you." Nia met his gaze, her dark eyes burning with defiance. "You're wrong," she said, her voice ablade. "This won't stick." He shrugged, standing with a creak of his chair. "We'll see. Court's tomorrow. Enjoy your last night in solitary." Guards hauled her back to her cell, their grips bruising her arms as they shoved her inside. The door slammed shut, the clang reverberating in her skull, and Nia sank onto the cot, her mind churning. She'd called Lena Price, her deputy, and a federal probe was coming. She just had to hold on, prove this was a frame-up. Marcus Tate would dig into it, find the cracks. She closed her eyes, breathing deep, believing she'd weather this storm. But the storm was about to turn into a hurricane. Morning came fast, a guard banging on her cell door before dawn. "Court time, Carter," he barked, cuffing her wrists. With a smirk, she was marched to a van, the air outside sharp with frost, and driven to the Carverton courthouse. The same packed gallery greeted her, reporters scribbling furiously, their flashes blinding as she shuffled in, chains rattling. Marcus Tate waited at the defense table, his silver hair disheveled, his pinstripe suit wrinkled from a sleepless night. "Nia," he whispered as she sat, his voice tight with urgency. "They're charging you with murder. Tanya Reid, prints on the weapon." Nia's jaw tightened. "It's a lie, Marcus. They set it up." He nodded, his eyes grim. "I know, I've got something. The guard who unlocked your cell, he's got a record of payoffs. We can use it." The trial kicked off with a roar, Lisa Dunn striding to the center, her blonde bob swinging as she faced the jury. "Nia Carter's a killer," she declared, her voice ringing with conviction. "She started a riot, stabbed an inmate in cold blood. This isn't obstruction anymore, it's murder." She waved the shiv in its evidence bag, the blood-crusted blade catching the light, and the jury gasped, their faces paling. Hollis and Vance sat in the gallery, their uniforms swapped for cheap suits, but their smirks were unmistakable, glinting, like knives. Dunn called the buzz-cut guard who took the stand with a swagger. "Saw her fighting," he lied, his drawl thick. "She had the shiv, stabbed Reid when the chaos hit." Nia's blood boiled, her hands trembling with rage. She hadn't even been in the main block when Reid died. Marcus leapt up, his voice cutting through the room. "Objection. This man's a liar. He unlocked her cell, let those inmates in. Look at his bank records, cash deposits from known associates of officers Hollis and Vance." He slapped a stack of papers on the table, printouts of transactions, dates circled in red. The gallery murmured, and Judge Kent's scowl deepened, his gavel hovering. "Overruled," he snapped, his tone dripping with disdain. "Stick to the case, Tate, not conspiracy theories." Marcus pressed on, calling the nervous young guard who'd slipped Nia the phone. She took the stand, her hands twisting in her lap. "He opened the door," she whispered, pointing at the buzz-cut guard. "Told us to stay quiet about it." Kent cut her off, banging the gavel. "Enough, testimony's irrelevant." Nia's hope flickered, then flared as Marcus fought. He had proof, a crack in their armor. Dunn fumbled, her polish slipping as she rushed to close, but the jury deliberated for hours, a tense eternity. When they returned, the foreman's voice was flat. Not guilty on murder, technicality, insufficient evidence of intent. The gallery erupted, cheers clashing with boos, and Nia exhaled, her shoulders sagging with relief. Marcus clapped her back, a rare smile breaking through. "We did it, Nia, you're free." She stood, the cuffs falling away, her chest swelling with triumph. Crowds gathered outside as she walked into the crisp daylight, their chants washing over her. "Justice for Nia," some shouted, waving signs. She hugged Marcus, believing she'd beaten the frame-up, that Hollis and Vance were done. She'd never been more wrong. She stepped forward, the sun warming her face, and the crowd parted, cameras flashing in a frenzy. Then a crack split the air a sharp, deafening snap, and pain seared her shoulder. A hot graze that sent her staggering. Blood bloomed on her jumpsuit, a crimson stain spreading fast, and the crowd screamed, scattering like leaves in a storm. Nia dropped to one knee, her hand pressing the wound, her vision swimming as she scanned the rooftops. There, silhouetted, against the sky stood Hollis and Vance, their grins feral as Vance lowered a rifle. They'd hired a hitman, she realized, her mind racing through the fog of pain. Victor Grayson, the union boss pulling their strings, had orchestrated this. A kill shot to silence her before she could talk. Marcus grabbed her, dragging her behind a car as tires squealed and sirens wailed in the distance. "Stay down!" he shouted, his voice raw with panic. Nia's breath came in gasps, her shoulder throbbing, but she forced herself to focus. "They're not stopping," she rasped, blood slicking her fingers. "Grayson's behind it." Marcus nodded, his face pale. "We'll get you out." "Feds are coming." She leaned against the car, her head spinning, defiance burning through the pain. She'd walked out of jail thinking she'd won, that her release was the end of their game. But Hollis and Vance had escalated, turned her victory into a target on her back. From the rooftop, Hollis raised a hand, a mock salute, his grin a promise of more to come. Nia's eyes narrowed, her resolve hardening. They'd drawn blood, but she'd draw more. Nia Carter crouched behind the dented fender of Marcus Tate's car, her shoulder throbbing where the sniper's bullet had grazed her, blood seeping through her fingers as she pressed the wound. The Carverton courthouse loomed behind her, its stone facade pocked with shadows as screams echoed from the scattering crowd. Her jumpsuit clung to her sweat-soaked skin, the orange fabric a stark contrast to the grey pavement, now speckled with her blood. Marcus knelt beside her, his silver hair plastered to his forehead, his breath ragged as he scanned the rooftops. "They're gone," he muttered, his voice tight with fear. Nia nodded, her dark eyes narrowing as she replayed Hollis's mocking salute, Vance's feral grin. They'd hired a hitman, escalated their game from frame-ups to murder, and she'd walked right into it, thinking her release was a win. Sirens wailed closer, red and blue lights flashing through the chaos, but Nia knew Carverton's cops wouldn't save her. They'd pull the trigger themselves if they could. Paramedics swarmed, their gloved hands prying her arm away to bandage the gash, the sting of antiseptic sharp against her raw skin. "You're lucky," one said, his voice clipped as he worked. "Inch to the left, you'd be dead." Nia's lips twitched, a bitter half-smile. Luck had nothing to do with it. She'd survived because she had to, because Hollis and Vance wouldn't stop until she was buried. Marcus helped her stand, her legs shaky but holding, and they pushed through the throng of reporters, their microphones thrusting forward like spears. "Ms. Carter, who shot you?" one shouted, her voice shrill. "Was this retaliation?" another demanded. Nia kept her head down, her jaw clenched, until they reached a waiting ambulance. She needed a platform, a way to strike back. She'd been silent too long. Hours later, patched up and released from the hospital, Nia stood in a cramped hotel conference room, the air thick with the hum of cameras and the rustle of notepads. Her shoulder ached under a fresh bandage, her borrowed blazer stiff against her frame, but she faced the press with a fire in her gut. Marcus flanked her, his pinstripe suit rumpled, while Lena Price, her deputy, loomed in the background, her short braids framing a face set with determination. Nia gripped the podium, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. "I'm Nia Carter, head of Homeland Security," she began, pausing as gasps rippled through the crowd. She pulled her badge from her pocket, its gold shield glinting, under the lights, and held it high. "Officers Brent Hollis and Kyle Vance framed me, attacked me, and today they tried to kill me. This isn't just about me. It's about a system rotting from the inside, and I'm here to burn it down." The room erupted, reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing in a blinding storm. "How long have you been head of Homeland Security?" one yelled. "Why didn't you reveal this sooner?" another pressed. Nia ignored them, her gaze steady. "I've got proof," she said, nodding to Lena, who plugged a drive into a laptop. The screen flared to life, showing grainy footage from the jail riot, the buzz-cut guard unlocking her cell, the inmates charging in. "They set me up for murder, then shot at me when I walked free. Carverton's police are corrupt and I'm calling for a federal investigation." The crowd buzzed, phones lighting up as the story went live, trending within minutes. Nia felt a surge of triumph, her badge a shield at last. She'd assumed going public would protect her, force Hollis and Vance into retreat. She'd misjudged their desperation. By nightfall, the counterattack hit like a tidal wave. Nia sat in her hotel room, a modest suite with peeling wallpaper and a flickering TV, watching the fallout unfold. Local news channels flipped the script, their anchors' polished voices dripping with skepticism. Nia Carter claiming to be a federal official may be a fraud, one said, her blonde curls bouncing as she spoke. Another flashed a headline, Homeland Security Head or Hoax. Then the bombshell dropped. A grainy audio clip played, Nia's, a voice distorted but recognizable, snarling racial slurs at Hollis and Vance. You white pigs won't stop me, it hissed, followed by, I'll burn this city down. Nia's stomach plummeted, her hands trembling as she gripped the remote. She'd never said those words, never even thought them, but the edit was seamless, chillingly convincing. Marcus burst in, his face ashen, a laptop tucked under his arm. They've doctored it, he said, slamming the device on the table, leaked it to every outlet in Carverton. Social media's exploding. Nia scrolled her phone, her throat tightening as hashtags flared. Nihilize Juan fake fed. Comments poured in, vicious and unrelenting. She's a race-baiting liar, one read. Lock her up for good, another demanded. Protests erupted downtown, footage showing crowds clashing, some waving signs supporting her, others hurling bottles and screaming, traitor. Nia's chest burned, rage warring with disbelief. Hollis and Vance had turned her truth into a weapon, twisting her stand against corruption into a racist rant. She'd thought her press conference would shield her, rally the public. Instead, it had painted a bigger target on her back. The hotel phone rang, its shrill tones slicing through. The tension, Nia answered, her voice clipped. Carter. A low chuckle crackled through the line, Hollis's gravelly timbre unmistakable. Nice speech, sweetheart, he said, his words dripping with mockery. Too bad no one believes you now. Sleep. Tight. The line went dead and Nia slammed the receiver down, her knuckles whitening. Marcus paced, his hands raking through his hair. We'll fight this, Nia. Lena's got feds en route. We'll prove it's fake. She nodded, forcing calm, but dread gnawed at her. She'd assumed the audio would unravel under scrutiny, that her team could outpace their lies. Then the floor shook, a roar swelling outside. She rushed to the window, peeling back the curtain to see chaos erupting below. A mob stormed the hotel parking lot, dozens strong, their faces twisted with fury. Traitor! They chanted, fists raised, some clutching bats and bricks. Glass shattered as a bottle crashed through a car windshield, flames licking up from a rag stuffed in its neck. Nia's pulse raced, her breath fogging the pain. They're here for me, she whispered, stepping back. Marcus grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the door. We've got to go now. They bolted for the fire. Exit, the stairwell dark and narrow, their footsteps pounding as shouts echoed closer. Nia's shoulder ached with every jolt, but she pushed through, bursting into an alley as the mob's roar faded behind them. She leaned against a dumpster, catching her breath, thinking she'd dodged the worst. She was wrong again. Her phone buzzed, a call from an unknown number. She answered, her voice a rasp. Who's this? A sob broke through, high and panicked, and Nia's blood froze. Mom? It was Jade, her 16-year-old daughter, her voice trembling. So they're here, cops. They busted in, said you're a terrorist. They took me, Mom. I don't know where I am. The line cut off, static swallowing Jade's cries, and Nia's knees buckled, Marcus catching her before she hit the ground. Jade, she gasped, her vision blurring with tears and rage. Hollis and Vance had raided her home, snatched her daughter, turned her family into leverage. She'd thought exposing them would protect her, keep her loved ones safe. Now Jade was gone, and the game had shifted to a nightmare she couldn't outrun. Nia straightened, wiping her face, her resolve hardening into steel. They've crossed a line, she told Marcus, her voice low and lethal. I'm ending this. He nodded, his eyes fierce. We'll find her. Lena's mobilizing everything. Nia clutched her phone, the weight of Jade's absence crushing her chest. She'd assumed her daughter was safe with relatives out of Carverton's reach. Hollis and Vance had proven her wrong, their retaliation slicing deeper than any bullet. They'd turned her victory into a war on her blood, and she'd make them pay. Drop a comment with the number 1 if you're raging at Hollis and Vance for targeting Jade. Hit like if you think Nia's about to unleash hell, and subscribe to see how she fights back. Can Nia save her daughter from these ruthless cops, or will their next strike break her for good? Nia Carter stood in the Carverton alley, her breath fogging in the cold night air, her blazer damp with sweat and blood from the graze on her shoulder. The distant roar of the mob faded, their chants swallowed by the city's hum, but her heart pounded louder than ever, Jade's panicked sobs echoing in her skull. Her daughter was gone, snatched by Hollis and Vance, labeled a terrorist's kin in their twisted game. Marcus Tate gripped her arm, his silver hair wild, his eyes darting down the shadowed street. "We'll find her, Nia," he said, his voice a lifeline in the chaos. She nodded, her jaw clenched so tight it ached, her mind racing to pinpoint Jade's location. She'd tracked threats across continents as head of Homeland Security, dismantled cartels with a phone call. Now her own flesh and blood was the target, and every second burned like acid. Her phone buzzed, a blocked number flashing on the cracked screen. She answered, her voice a low growl. "Where's my daughter?" A chuckle slithered through, Hollis's gravelly tone unmistakable. "She's safe for now," he said, his words dripping with menace. "Pretty little thing crying for her mummy." Nia's stomach churned, rage flaring hot in her chest. "You touch her and you're dead," she spat, her free hand balling into a fist. Vance's voice cut in, sharp and taunting. "Big talk from a nobody. Retract your story, call off the feds, or she's gone. Your choice." The line clicked dead, but not before a video pinged through. Nia opened it, her breath catching as Jade's face filled the screen, her 16-year-old eyes wide with terror, duct tape sealing her mouth. She sat in a chair, wrists bound, a flickering bulb swinging above her in what looked like a warehouse. Nia's knees trembled, but she forced herself upright, shoving the phone at Marcus. "They've got her in a warehouse. We need Lena." He nodded, dialing as they moved, ducking into a side street where shadows cloaked them from prying eyes. Lena Price answered on the first ring, her voice crisp despite the late hour. "Nia, I've got a tactical team ready. Where are we hitting?" Nia's mind raced, piecing together Carverton's layout. The industrial sprawl west of downtown had dozens of abandoned warehouses, relics of a busted steel boom. The video's background showed rusted beams and cracked concrete, a match for those haunts. "West side," she said, her tone clipped. "Old Steel District. Move fast." Lena barked orders on her end, and Nia hung up, her resolve hardening. She'd get Jade back, end this nightmare. She'd assumed Grayson, the union boss, was behind the sniper hit. Now he'd escalated to kidnapping, and Hollis and Vance were his hands. They met Lena's team an hour later, a mile from the target zone, in a deserted lot where black SUVs idled under a flickering street lamp. Lena strode forward, her short braids swaying, her tactical vest snug over a lean frame. 6 agents flanked her, faces shadowed under helmets, rifles slung low. "We've narrowed it to 3 warehouses," she said, spreading a map on the hood of a truck. Thermal picked up movement in the middle one. 8 hostiles, 1 hostage. Nia's eyes locked on the map, her finger tracing the central building. "That's it," she said, her voice steel. "I'm going in." Lena frowned, grabbing her arm. "You're injured, Nia. Let us handle it." Nia shook her off, her gaze fierce. "She's my daughter. I'm not sitting this out." Lena relented, handing her a vest and a Glock, its weight familiar in her palm. They moved in silence, a dark swarm cutting through the night, the warehouses looming like skeletal giants against the sky. The target building squatted at the end of a gravel road, its windows boarded, its roof sagging under years of neglect. Nia's shoulder ached with every step, but she pushed through, adrenaline drowning the pain. They breached the side door, a rusted slab that groaned under a crowbar, and slipped inside. The air was stale, thick with dust and oil, the floor littered with broken crates. Footsteps echoed ahead, and Nia signaled the team, her heart hammering as they fanned out. She spotted Jade first, tied to a chair in the center of the cavernous space, her muffled whimpers cutting through the silence. 4 men stood guard, their faces hard, their hands gripping pistols. Nia's eyes darted, searching for Hollis and Vance, but they weren't there. Grayson's goons, she realized, hired muscle for the union boss's dirty work. "Now," she whispered, and Lena's team struck, flashbangs bursting in blinding flares. Gunfire erupted, sharp cracks splitting the air as agents dropped 2 guards, their bodies thudding to the concrete. Nia sprinted for Jade, ducking a bullet that whizzed past her ear, its heat grazing her cheek. She reached her daughter, yanking the tape from her mouth, Jade's sobs breaking free as Nia cut her bonds with a knife from her vest. "Mom!" Jade gasped, throwing her arms around Nia, her thin frame trembling. Nia hugged her tight, relief flooding her chest, her daughter's warmth a balm against the chaos. "I've got you," she whispered, pulling Jade behind a crate. As Lena's team mowed down the last guards, their screams fading into silence. The warehouse stilled, the air thick with gunpowder and blood, and Nia stood, Jade clinging to her side. "We're clear," Lena called, her rifle lowered, her agents sweeping the perimeter. Nia exhaled, her knees weak but holding, believing. The nightmare was over. She'd rescued Jade, beaten Grayson's trap. She'd never been more wrong. Her phone buzzed, Hollis's voice crackling through on speaker before she could answer. "Nice move, Carter," he said, his tone a sneer. "Too bad it's your last." A rumble shook the floor, a deep, guttural groan rising from below, and Nia's eyes widened as cracks spiderwebbed the concrete. "Get out!" she shouted, shoving Jade toward the door, but it was too late. An explosion roared, a fireball erupting from the warehouse's core, the blast hurling Nia and Jade into a pile of debris. Her ears rang, her vision blurring as heat seared her skin, shrapnel slicing her arm. She crawled, dragging Jade with her, the girl coughing through the smoke, her eyes streaming with tears. The roof groaned, beams crashing down, and Nia shielded Jade with her body, pain lancing through her ribs as a chunk of metal pinned her leg. Lena's voice cut through the haze, sharp and urgent. "Nia, move!" Hands grabbed her, agents pulling, her free hauling Jade alongside. They stumbled out, the warehouse collapsing in a thunderous heap behind them, dust choking the air. Nia sank to the gravel, her chest heaving, blood dripping from her arm as Jade clung to her, sobbing. She'd saved her daughter, beaten the odds, but her triumph shattered as sirens wailed in the distance. A news chopper circled overhead, its spotlight blinding, and Nia's phone buzzed again, this time with a live feed. Hollis's face filled the screen, his grin wide as he stood in a studio, Vance beside him. "Breaking news," he said, his voice booming. "Nia Carter, so-called Homeland Security head, just bombed a Carverton warehouse. Terrorist confirmed." Nia's stomach dropped, her breath catching as the feed cut to drone footage of the wreckage, flames licking the night sky. "The anchor's," voice droned on. "Authorities say Carter planted the explosive, endangering lives." The lie hit like a sledgehammer, twisting her rescue into a crime. Jade whimpered, her voice small. "Mom, what's happening?" Nia pulled her close, her mind reeling. Grayson had triggered the bomb, a dead man's switch set before they'd stormed in, and Hollis and Vance had spun it into a public execution of her name. She'd assumed Grayson's retreat meant he'd lost, that her victory was secure. Now coughing in the ash, her daughter trembling beside her, she saw the truth. They'd turned her win into a catastrophe, and the war was far from over. Lena knelt beside her, her face smudged with soot. "Feds are here," she said, her tone grim. "We'll clear this, Nia. Grayson's gone, but those cops are still pulling strings." Nia nodded, wiping blood from her lip, her resolve hardening despite the pain. She'd rescued Jade, survived the blast, but Hollis and Vance had escalated beyond her worst fears. They'd framed her as a bomber, a terrorist, and the city was swallowing it whole. She'd thought she'd outmaneuvered them, but they'd buried her deeper, and Jade's tear-streaked face was a reminder of the cost. They'd pay, she vowed, her eyes glinting with fury as the chopper's roar faded. This wasn't the end, it was a new battlefield. Nia Carter knelt on the gravel outside the smoldering warehouse, her arm bleeding through the makeshift bandage, her lungs burning from the ash-choked air. Jade clung to her, her 16-year-old frame trembling, her sobs muffled against Nia's. Torn blazer. The night sky glowed orange, flames licking the wreckage as sirens screamed closer, their wail a jagged edge against the chaos. Lena Price stood over them, her tactical vest streaked with soot, her short braids swaying as she barked. Orders to her agents. "Secure the perimeter, get medics here now," she shouted, her voice cutting through the din. Nia's ears rang from the blast, her shoulder throbbing where shrapnel had sliced her, but her mind was razor-sharp, replaying Hollis's smug face on that live feed. He'd framed her as a terrorist, turned her rescue into a city-wide lie, and she'd walked out of the fire thinking she'd won. Now with Jade safe but the world against her, she saw the depth of their trap. Federal agents swarmed in, black SUVs screeching to a halt, their boots pounding the ground as they fanned. Out. 2 medics rushed to Nia, their hands quick and steady as they cleaned her wounds, wrapping her arm in gauze that stung against her raw skin. "You're a mess," one muttered, his tone gruff but not unkind. Nia nodded, her gaze fixed on Jade, who shivered under a blanket, her eyes red from tears and smoke. "I'm fine," Nia rasped, pushing them away. "Get her checked first." The medics obeyed, and Nia stood, her legs wobbling but holding, as Lena approached. "Hollis and Vance are in custody," she said, her voice low. "Feds nabbed them at the station after that broadcast. Grayson's dead in the rubble, but this isn't over." Nia's chest tightened, a flicker of relief drowned by dread. Custody didn't mean defeat, not with these snakes. She called Marcus. "Tate from a burner phone," Lena handed her, his voice crackling through the static. "Nia, thank God," he said, relief flooding his words. "Jade, okay?" Nia glanced at her daughter, now sipping water from a medic's canteen. "She's alive, shaken. They're framing me for the bomb." Marcus cursed, his tone fierce. "I saw the news. We'll fight it. You're clear?" Nia exhaled, leaning against an SUV. "For now, get me a secure line to the president. We're ending this." Marcus agreed, and within hours Nia was patched through, her voice steady as she briefed the commander-in-chief. "Hollis and Vance are corrupt, sir," she said, pacing the lot. "They've got Carverton locked down, working with Victor Grayson. I need full authority to clean it up." The president's baritone rumbled back, calm but firm. "You've got it, Nia. Shut it down." She hung up, her chest swelling with triumph. They were locked up. She had the green light. She'd assumed. Victory was hers. She'd misjudged again. The first sign of trouble hit at midnight. Nia and Jade were holed up in a federal safe house, a squat brick building on Carverton's outskirts, its windows shuttered, its walls thick with silence. Lena's team guarded the perimeter, rifles glinting under floodlights, while Nia sat at a table, poring over maps and arrest reports. Jade slept on a cot, her breathing uneven, her face streaked with dried tears. Then the lights flickered, a low hum dying as the room plunged into dark. Nia's head snapped up, her hand reaching for the Glock at her hip. "Lena!" she called, her voice sharp. Her deputy burst in, her face tense. "Power's out, citywide." Nia's stomach dropped, her mind racing. A blackout this sudden wasn't a glitch. It was an attack. Her phone buzzed, a live stream popping up unbidden, Grayson's voice crackling through despite his death. "People of Carverton," he said, his tone a ghostly taunt. "Nia Carter did this. She bombed your city. Now she's killing your lights. Rise up." The feed cut to drone shots of the warehouse, then blacked out streets, panic spreading like wildfire. Nia's blood ran cold. Grayson had pre-recorded this, a dead man's gambit to bury her even from the grave. She rushed to the window, peeling back a shutter to see flames in the distance, plumes of smoke rising from Carverton's east side, the black neighborhood she'd walked days ago. Shouts echoed, glass shattering, and her phone lit up with alerts. Riots breaking out, militias torching homes. Nia spun to Lena, her voice a command. "Get me out there, we're stopping this." Lena nodded, rallying her team, and they piled into SUVs, tires squealing as they raced downtown. The city was a war zone, streetlights dead, buildings ablaze, shadows darting through the chaos. Nia's team hit the east side first, where a racist militia, clad in camo and masks, hurled Molotovs into row houses. their chants a guttural roar. "Carter's fault! Burn it down!" Nia leapt from the vehicle. Her Glock raised and fired into the air, the crack splitting the night. "Stand down!" she shouted, her voice raw with fury. The militia froze, then scattered as Lena's agents moved in, cuffs snapping around wrists, rifles confiscated in a blur of motion. She led a counter-op, block by block, her team dousing fires, evacuating families, their cries piercing the smoke. Nia's arm ached, her lungs screaming, but she pushed on, directing power crews to substations Grayson's men had sabotaged. By dawn, the grid flickered back, lights stuttering to life, and the riots ebbed, exhausted crowds slinking away. Nia stood on a charred street, soot staining her face, her chest heaving with relief. She'd restored order, saved lives, thinking she'd regained control. The president called, his voice warm. "Good work, Nia. You're a hero." She smiled, faintly believing the worst was past. Then Lena handed her a tablet, her face grim. "You need to see this." The screen glowed with a leaked memo, stamped with Homeland Security's seal, claiming Nia had ordered the blackout to frame Hollis and Vance, a rogue op to seize power. Nia's breath caught, her hands shaking as she read the lies. Dates. Signatures, all forged but flawless. News anchors ran with it, their voices shrill. "Carter's a traitor," one declared. "Federal cover-up exposed." Her own team stared at her, doubt creeping into their eyes, and Lena's jaw tightened. "It's fake, but it's spreading," she said. "They're suspending you, Nia. Orders from D.C. Nia's knees buckled, her triumph crumbling to dust. She'd fought through hell, locked up the cops only to be betrayed by a phantom document. Hollis and Vance smirked from jail, their hands clean, while Grayson's ghost struck from beyond. She sank onto a curb, Jade rushing to her side, her voice small. "Mom, what's happening?" Nia pulled her close, her throat raw. "They're not done," she whispered, her eyes glinting with defiance. She'd assumed Grayson's death and the arrests had clipped their wings, that her counterstrike had won the day. Now suspended, her name a curse on every tongue, she saw the truth. They'd turned Carverton into a siege, her victory into a lie, and her own people doubted her. She'd thought she'd outsmarted them, but they'd buried her deeper and the city was their weapon. Her suspension was a shackle, but she'd break it. They'd pay, she vowed, her resolve a ember glowing in the ash. Drop a comment with the #1 if you think Nia's been stabbed in the back by her own team. Hit like if you're stunned by Grayson's posthumous revenge, and subscribe to catch her next fight against this twisted system. Will Nia claw her way out of this betrayal, or has Carverton's corruption finally broken her spirit? Nia Carter sat on the curb of a charred Carverton street, her blazer torn and streaked with soot, her arm throbbing beneath the blood-soaked gauze. Jade huddled beside her, her 16-year-old frame wrapped in a blanket, her eyes hollow from the night's chaos. The dawn sky bled pink over the smouldering east side, the air thick with the acrid sting of burned rubber and wood. Federal agents milled around, their boots crunching on broken glass, their voices a low hum as they secured the scene. Lena Price stood a few feet away, her tactical vest unclipped, her short braids swaying as she scrolled a tablet, her jaw tight with tension. Nia's suspension hung over her like a guillotine, the forged memo branding her a traitor still buzzing. Across every screen in the city. She'd locked up Hollis and Vance, quelled the riots only to be stabbed in the back by her own agency. She'd assumed it was temporary, a hiccup she'd fix. Now, staring at the wreckage, she wasn't so sure. Lena knelt beside her, her voice low and urgent. "We've got a leak, Nia. Someone inside Homeland Security fed that memo to the press. I'm digging, but it's deep." Nia's chest tightened, her mind racing, a mole burrowing through her ranks, turning her victory into a noose. She'd trusted her team, leaned on Lena to pull her through, but now doubt gnawed at her. "Find them," she said, her tone steel despite the exhaustion weighing her down. "I'm not done yet." Lena nodded, her eyes fierce, and handed Nia a burner phone. "Use this secure line, I'll get you back in." Nia took it, her fingers brushing the cracked screen, and stood, pulling Jade with her. She wouldn't sit idle, suspended or not. She'd root out the traitor, reclaim her name. She'd assumed the president's faith would hold. She'd misjudged the rot. They moved to a new safe house, a drab apartment on Carverton's north edge, its walls peeling, its windows sealed with blackout curtains. Jade crashed on a sagging couch, her breathing steady at last, while Naya paced, the burner phone hot in her hand. She dialed a string of ex-FBI contacts, old allies from her counter-terrorism days, their voices crackling through with guarded trust. "Nia, you're a ghost out here," one said, his tone wary. "Words, you've gone rogue." She gritted, her teeth explaining the frame-up, the mole, the blackout. "I need intel," she said. "Grayson's network, who's still active?" They delivered, feeding her leads on the Union boss's lieutenants, a web of corruption stretching beyond Hollis and Vance. She traced the memo's origin, her fingers flying over a borrowed laptop, hacking into encrypted servers with skills she'd honed decades ago. By noon she had it. A mid-level analyst, Darren Cole, his bank account fat with unexplained deposits, his emails pinging Grayson's crew. Naya called Lena, her voice a hiss. "It's Cole. He's the mole. Reinstate me now." Lena moved fast, storming Homeland Security's regional office with a team, dragging Cole from his desk in cuffs, his protests drowned by the clatter of keyboards. The president was briefed, his baritone rumbling through a secure line as Nia laid out the evidence. Cole's payoffs, his forged memo, his ties to Grayson's empire. "How you're back, Naya," the president said, his tone firm. "Full authority, clean this mess." She exhaled, her shoulders sagging with relief, and within hours her suspension lifted, her badge reactivated. She raided Grayson's hideout. Next, a derelict factory on Carverton's fringe, its rusted silos clawing the sky. Lena's team breached the doors, flashbangs popping, and Nia stormed in, her Glock raised, Jade's face fueling her fury. They found Grayson's lieutenants, 6 men scrambling for weapons, but her agents cut them down, their bodies slumping in pools of blood. The victory swelled as Hollis and Vance cracked under federal pressure, their confessions spilling live. On every channel, Hollis's gravelly voice trembled as he admitted framing Nia, planting the drugs, hiring the hitman. Vance followed, his wiry frame slouched, confessing the warehouse bomb, the blackout plot, all under Grayson's orders. "We thought we'd win," he muttered, his smirk gone. Carverton cheered, crowds flooding the streets, their signs now hailing Nia as a hero. News anchors flipped their tune, praising her resilience, her badge gleaming on screen. She stood, in the safe house watching the broadcast, Jade's arms around her waist, a rare smile tugging her lips. She'd rooted out the mole, locked up the cops, dismantled Grayson's network. She'd assumed justice was hers, that the nightmare was over. She'd never been more wrong. The blast came at dusk, a thunderous roar that shook the safe house walls, shattering the windows in a spray of glass. Nia dove, pulling Jade under the table as flames erupted outside, the sky turning black with smoke. Her ears rang, her vision, swimming as she crawled to the window, peering through the jagged frame. The Homeland Security field office, 2 miles away, was a crater, its concrete husk swallowed by fire. Sirens wailed, choppers buzzing overhead, and Naya's phone lit up, with a call from Lena. "Nia!" Her deputy shouted, her voice breaking. "It's gone, missile strike, I'm hit." The line crackled, then died, and Nia's heart stopped, her breath freezing in her chest. Lena was gone, her fierce spirit snuffed out in an instant, along with dozens of agents she'd led. She staggered to her feet, Jade clinging to her, tears streaming down her daughter's face. The TV flickered on, Grayson's face filling the screen, a pre-recorded video smirking from beyond the grave. "Carter. Thought she'd won," he said, his voice a taunt. "This is my last gift. She's rogue, a killer. Look at her work." The feed cut to drone footage of the burning office, bodies strewn in the rubble, and Nia's stomach lurched, bile rising in her throat. Grayson had rigged a military drone, a final strike planned before his death, and pinned it on her. News. Anchors screamed treason, the president's voice crackling through a breaking alert. "Nia Carter is hereby ordered arrested. She's a threat to national security." Her own team turned, agents outside the safe house drawing weapons, their shouts a blur as they breached the door. Nia grabbed Jade, her mind racing as she kicked open a back exit, shoving her daughter into the night. "Run!" she hissed, handing her the burner phone. "Find Marcus." Jade sobbed but obeyed, vanishing into the shadows as Nia faced the agents, her Glock raised. "Stand down," she barked, her voice raw. They hesitated, then lunged, and she fired, dropping two before a baton cracked her skull, stars exploding. In her vision, she fell, blood pooling beneath her, and they cuffed her, dragging her to a van as the city burned behind her. She'd thought exposing Grayson's lieutenants, forcing Hollis and Vance's confessions, had sealed her triumph. Now with Lena dead, her office in ruins and the president's orders ringing in her ears, she saw the truth. Grayson's final blow had flipped her victory into a death sentence, and she'd walked right into it. They dumped her in a holding cell, a concrete box stinking of piss and despair, her head pounding from the blow. She sank against the wall, her blazer shredded, her badge stripped away. The TV outside blared, anchors branding her a rogue agent, a terrorist mastermind. She'd assumed her reinstatement was the end, that justice would hold. Now, underground, her team shattered. She realized Hollis and Vance had won from there. Cells, Grayson's ghost laughing through the flames. She'd go dark, she vowed, her eyes glinting with fury as blood dripped from her brow. She'd find Jade, regroup, strike back. They'd turned her into a fugitive, but she'd turn their game into their graves. Nia Carter slumped against the cold concrete wall of her holding cell, her head throbbing where the baton had cracked her skull, blood matting her hair and trickling down her cheek. The air reeked of urine and mold, a single bulb flickering overhead, casting jagged shadows across the scarred floor. Her blazer hung in tatters, her wrists raw from the cuffs they'd slapped on her after dragging her from the safe house. Outside, a TV blared through the bars, its volume a relentless assault, anchors shouting her name in venomous tones. "Nia Carter, rogue agent, bombed her own office," one declared, her voice shrill. "A nationwide manhunt is underway," another added, his baritone heavy with judgment. She'd gone from hero to hunted in hours, Grayson's missile strike flipping her triumph into a death warrant. Jade was out there, running, and Nia's heart ached with every beat, praying her daughter had reached Marcus. She'd assumed the worst was behind her. Now locked in this hole, she saw the abyss ahead. The cell door rattled and two federal agents stormed in, their black tactical gear stark against the dimness, their faces masked with helmets. "Up," one barked, his voice muffled but sharp, yanking her to her feet. Nia stumbled, her vision swimming, but she straightened, her dark eyes glinting with defiance. They marched her out, boots echoing down the hall, and shoved her into a van, its interior a cage of steel and shadows. She sat, her hands cuffed behind her, the engine rumbling as they sped through Carverton's night. She memorized the turns, the hum of tires on asphalt, mapping their route. Left, right, straight for 3 miles. They were heading south toward E.I.'s, the federal lockup on the city's edge. She'd break free, she vowed, her mind racing despite the pain. She'd evaded worse in her FBI days, slipped through nets tighter than this. She just needed an opening. It came at a red light, the van, idling as a train whistle wailed in the distance. The driver cursed, fumbling with the radio, static crackling through while his partner twisted to glare at her. "Don't try anything," he growled, his hand on his holster. Nia stayed still, her face blank, but her fingers worked the cuffs. Lock, a trick she'd learned from a cartel informant years ago. Metal clicked, her wrists loosening, and when the light turned green, she moved. She lunged, slamming her elbow into the passenger's throat, his gasp choking off as she snatched his gun. The driver swerved, shouting, but she pressed the barrel to his head. "Pull over," she hissed, her voice ice. He obeyed, tires screeching as the van jolted to a stop on a deserted stretch of road, weeds clawing the pavement. She kicked the door open, leaping out, the night air sharp against her sweat-soaked skin. The driver reached for his radio, but she fired, the bullet shattering it, sparks flying as he yelped. "Stay down," she warned, then bolted, her legs pumping despite the ache in her bones. She darted into a thicket of trees, branches snapping against her arms, her breath ragged as she wove through the dark. Sirens wailed behind her, lights flashing through the leaves, but she didn't stop, her mind locked on survival. She'd assumed they'd underestimated her, thought her broken. Now, free but hunted, she'd prove them wrong. She needed allies, a way to fight back. She'd go dark, call in favors from her past, turn this manhunt into her weapon. By dawn, she reached a payphone on Carverton's outskirts, its glass booth cracked but functional. She dialed an old FBI contact, Ray Suarez, a gruff ex-agent who'd owed her since she'd saved his life in a raid gone bad. "Nia?" he answered, his voice gravelly with sleep. "You're a damn ghost." She kept it short, her words clipped. "I'm framed, Ray. Missile strike wasn't me. Grayson's crew, I need help." He paused, then grunted. "Heard the chatter. You're hot, but I've got people. Meet me at the old mill, 2 hours." She hung up, her chest easing slightly, and slipped into an abandoned gas station, its pumps rusted, its windows boarded. She patched her wounds with a stolen first aid kit, the sting of alcohol sharp against her cuts, and waited, her Glock tucked close. Ray arrived with 3 others, grizzled men in faded jackets, their eyes hard but loyal. "You look like hell," he said, tossing her a burner phone and a backpack stuffed with cash and clothes. "Feds are everywhere, Nia. Drones, roadblocks. You're a public enemy one." She nodded, pulling on a hoodie to mask her face. "They've got Jade safe," Ray confirmed, his tone steady. "Marcus has her, hidden upstate. She's shaken, but alive." Nia's shoulders sagged, relief flooding her, but her resolve sharpened. She'd rally these ex-FBI allies, hack Grayson's network, clear her name. They set up in the mill, a crumbling husk of brick and steel, its machinery silent under cobwebs. Nia cracked into dark web servers, her fingers flying over a laptop Ray supplied, tracing Grayson's financial trails. She found it. Militia accounts wired to Hollis and Vance funding the blackout, the missile, all pinned on her. She streamed the proof live, her face obscured, her voice steady as it hit underground forums. "I'm Nia Carter, head of Homeland." "Security," she said, uploading bank records, Grayson's pre-recorded taunts. "They framed me, bombed my office, killed my team. This is the truth." The feed spread, millions watching as hackers amplified it, news outlets picking it up despite the Fed's chokehold. By noon, the president called, his voice strained but clear. "Nia, we've seen it. You're pardoned, reinstated. Come in." She stood in the mill, sunlight streaming through broken rafters, her chest swelling with triumph. Crowds rallied. Online, Nia truth trending, and she walked out thinking she'd outsmarted them, beaten the manhunt. She'd never been more wrong. The trap sprang at dusk. Nia was en route to a federal pickup, Ray's crew flanking her in a beat-up sedan, when headlights flared ahead, SWAT vans screeching to a halt. Hollis and Vance emerged, out on bail, their cheap suits swapped for tactical gear, their grins feral as they led a dozen agents. "Surprise, Carter!" Hollis barked, his voice booming over a megaphone. "You're done!" Nia's stomach dropped, her hand gripping the Glock as Ray swerved, tires squealing. "They've got pull," he hissed, flooring it, but a spike strip-shredded their wheels, the sedan lurching to a stop. Agents swarmed, rifles raised, and Nia dove out, firing back, bullets pinging off metal as Ray's men scattered, 2 dropping in sprays of blood. She sprinted, her breath ragged, Hollis's shouts echoing behind her. "You're a dead woman," he roared, his gun blazing. She ducked into an alley, her shoulder slamming a dumpster, pain flaring as she climbed a fire escape, her boots slipping on rusted rungs. They cornered her on a rooftop, the city sprawling. Below its lights a mocking glow. Hollis and Vance strode forward, their agents fanning out, a camera drone buzzing overhead, broadcasting live. "Smile, Carter," Vance sneered, his wiry frame coiled as he aimed his pistol. "Nations watching your execution. Terrorist scum." Nia's back hit the ledge, her Glock raised, her pulse thundering. She'd hacked their lies, won the president's pardon, thought she'd turned the tide. Now, pinned, her allies bleeding out below, she saw the truth. They'd flipped her comeback into a public slaughter, and she was out of moves. Hollis stepped closer, his buzz-cut head gleaming under the drone's spotlight, his grin a slash of white. "Thought you'd outsmart us. Grayson planned this. You're finished." Nia's finger tightened on the trigger, her voice a rasp. "You'll burn for this." Vance laughed, raising his gun. "Not before you." The drone's red light blinked, millions watching, and Nia braced herself, her mind flashing to Jade, to Lena's lifeless voice, to the city she'd fought for. She'd assumed death was imminent, that this was the end. But a wild card was about to flip the game, and she didn't see it coming. Nia Carter stood on the Carverton rooftop, her back pressed against the crumbling ledge, the city's skyline sprawling below in a haze of flickering lights. Her Glock trembled in her grip, sweat stinging the cut on her brow, her torn blazer flapping in the night wind. Brent Hollis loomed before her, his buzz-cut head catching the drone's spotlight, his broad shoulders squared with triumph. Kyle Vance flanked him, his wiry frame taut, his pistol aimed at her chest, a sneer twisting his lips. SWAT agents fanned out, their rifles glinting, the drone buzzing overhead, its red eye broadcasting her execution to millions. Hollis's gravelly voice boomed, thick with malice. "End of the line, Carter. Grayson's plan worked. You're a dead terrorist now." Nia's pulse hammered, her breath shallow, Jade's face flashing in her mind. She'd hacked their lies, won a pardon, thought she'd turned the tide. Now, pinned and bleeding, she believed it was over. She'd misjudged. The wild card about to flip the game. A crackle split the air, the drone's feed stuttering as static flared across its lens. Hollis frowned, glancing up, and Vance's sneer faltered. Then Jade's voice burst through, sharp and fierce, hijacking the broadcast. "This is Jade Carter," she said, her 16-year-old tone trembling but resolute. "My mum's no terrorist. Here's the truth." The screen shifted, showing Hollis and Vance's confessions, their earlier TV breakdown replayed in crisp detail. Hollis admitting the frame-up, Vance confessing the bomb, their words damning under the studio lights. "They're lying now," Jade added, her voice rising. "They've got my mom trapped. Help her." Nia's heart lurched, pride and fear warring in her chest. Jade had trained with her in secret, learned to hack from Nia's late-night lessons, and now she'd turned the tables. Hollis roared, his face reddening as he spun toward the agents. "Shut it down!" he barked. But the drone kept rolling, Jade's stream unbreakable. Nia seized the chaos, her training snapping into focus. She lunged, slamming her Glock's butt into Vance's wrist, his gun clattering to the rooftop as he yelped. She pivoted, her elbow crashing into his jaw, bone crunching under the blow, and he crumpled, his wiry body folding like a broken doll. Hollis swung at her, his fist a meaty blur, but she ducked, her shoulder screaming with pain, and drove her knee into his gut. He doubled over, gasping, and she grabbed his neck, twisting with a savage snap. His spine cracked, his bulk dropping lifeless to the concrete, his eyes wide in shock. The agents hesitated, rifles wavering as Jade's voice echoed, millions watching their commanders fall. Nia raised her Glock, her voice a rasp. "Stand down, or you're next." Two charged, their boots pounding, and she fired, bullets tearing through Kevlar, their bodies thudding beside Hollis. The rest froze, hands up, as sirens wailed below, federal choppers slicing the sky. Nia kicked Vance's gun away, her chest heaving, blood dripping from her arm as she scanned the rooftop. She'd taken them down, turned their execution into her stand, Jade's hack her lifeline. She'd assumed death was seconds away, but her daughter had flipped it. Now, with Hollis dead and Vance out, she believed the fight was hers. She was wrong again. The ground trembled, a low rumble rising from the streets below, and Nia's eyes darted to the horizon. Smoke billowed, flames licking up from Carverton's core, screams piercing the night. Grayson's militia stormed in, 100 strong, their camo-clad figures swarming from vans, Molotovs arcing through the air. Gunfire erupted, sharp cracks splitting the chaos as they hit federal lines, a final wave Grayson had unleashed before his death. Nia's stomach dropped, her victory unraveling as the city burned. She'd killed the heads, but the body still thrashed, a beast she couldn't outrun. Choppers swooped low, rotors thumping, and Ray Suarez's voice crackled through a comms. Unit 1 agent dropped. "Nia, we're here," he said, his gruff tone steady. "Ex-FBI crew moving in, hold tight." She nodded, her resolve hardening, and dragged Vance's limp form to the ledge, propping him up as bait. Ray's team hit the streets, a dozen shadows cutting through the militia, their rifles blazing. Nia watched from above, her Glock ready, picking off stragglers who climbed the fire escape, their masks glinting in the firelight. Bullets pinged off the ledge, one grazing her thigh, pain flaring hot, but she held her ground, her aim steady. Below, Ray's crew pushed back, bodies piling in the streets, blood pooling on asphalt as the militia faltered. A chopper landed, its door sliding open, and Marcus Tate leapt out, his silver hair wild, his pinstripe suit torn. "Nia!" he shouted, waving her down. She hauled Vance over her shoulder, his groans faint, and stumbled to the ladder, descending into the fray. Ray met her at the base, his grizzled face smeared with sweat. "Grayson's gone, but these bastards won't quit," he said, firing into a retreating cluster. Nia dropped Vance, his body thudding beside her, and nodded. "End it," she rasped, joining the fight. They swept through a relentless tide, her Glock barking as militia fell, their screams swallowed by the roar of flames. By midnight, the streets stilled, the last of Grayson's men cut down, their vans smouldering husks. Nia stood amid the carnage, her chest heaving, Jade's broadcast still looping on hacked screens citywide. She'd beaten them, ended Grayson's reign, her allies a wall against the storm. Crowds gathered, their cheers faint but growing, and the president's voice broke through a radio exonerating her live. "Nia Carter is cleared," he declared. "A hero." She hugged Jade, who'd run from Marcus's side, tears streaking her face, and believed justice was hers at last. She'd miscalculated again. A final blow came as the dust settled, Grayson's voice crackling through every speaker in Carverton, a dead man's switch triggered by his defeat. "If I fall, you all burn," he hissed, his tone a ghostly taunt. A hiss rose from the sewers, a green mist curling up, and Nia's eyes widened, her breath catching as people coughed, clutching their throats. Chemical weapons, Grayson's last gift unleashed from hidden caches. Thousands choked, their screams a chorus of agony, and Nia stumbled, pulling Jade behind a wall as the mist thickened. "Mom!" Jade gasped, her voice raw, and Nia ripped her blazer, tying it over her daughter's mouth. Her own lungs burned, her vision blurring, but she dragged Jade to an SUV, slamming the door as Ray floored it. Weaving through the dying, the city convulsed, news helicopters circling, their feeds showing bodies piling in the streets, Carverton a graveyard under Grayson's poison. Nia's phone buzzed, a hacked alert blaming her. Carter's final act. Chemical terror. Her stomach lurched, her triumph poisoned as the nation turned again, anchors screaming her name in horror. She'd killed Hollis, crippled Vance, ended the militia, thought she'd won the war. Now, with Jade trembling beside her, the air thick with death, she saw the truth. Grayson had flipped her victory into a massacre, her name a curse once more. She'd assumed she'd outsmarted them, but they'd buried her in bodies, and the fight was far from over. Ray's voice cut through, grim but steady. "We've got a safe zone, Nia, hold on." She nodded, her eyes glinting with fury as blood dripped from her thigh, her resolve a steel thread in the chaos. She'd saved Jade, beaten the odds, but Grayson's ghost had struck deeper, turning her win into a nightmare. She'd regroup, find an antidote, fight back. They'd made her a monster, but she'd make them pay, her vow a whisper in the toxic air. This wasn't the end. It was a new hell, and she'd claw her way out. Nia Carter gripped the wheel of the SUV, her knuckles white against the cracked leather, her torn blazer flapping as she floored the gas through Carverton's dying streets. Jade sat beside her, her 16-year-old frame hunched, her breathing shallow under the makeshift mask of Nia's sleeve, her eyes wide with terror. Ray Suarez rode shotgun, his grizzled face taut, his rifle braced against the dash as he scanned the haze. The city choked under Grayson's chemical mist, a green shroud curling from the sewers, its acrid bite clawing at their lungs. Bodies littered the pavement, their hands clawing at throats, their mouths frozen in silent screams. Horns blared. From abandoned cars, their headlights cutting through the fog, while helicopters buzzed overhead, their rotors a distant thrum against the chaos. Nia's thigh bled, the graze from the rooftop fight soaking her pants, her arm throbbing where shrapnel had torn her flesh. She'd killed Hollis, crippled Vance, ended the militia, thought she'd won. Now, with thousands dying and her name cursed as the culprit, she saw the depth of Grayson's final trap. "Left!" Ray barked, his voice hoarse as he pointed to a side street. its buildings dark silhouettes in the mist. Nia swerved, tires screeching. The SUV jolting over a curb as she dodged a sprawled corpse, its eyes staring blankly at the sky. Jade whimpered, her hands trembling, and Nia squeezed her knee, her voice a rasp. "Hold on, baby. We're getting out." She'd neutralized the toxin, save Carverton, clear her name. She'd done it before, dismantled threats bigger than this as head of Homeland Security. Her mind raced, sifting through years of intel, landing on a memory. A classified stash of antidotes, hidden in a bunker beneath the old rail yard, prepped for bio-attacks she'd once briefed the president on. It was a mile north, a slim chance, in this hell, but she'd take it. She'd assumed she'd failed, that Grayson's poison was her end. She'd fight through, she vowed, her resolve a ember glowing in the dark. The rail yard loomed ahead, its rusted tracks glinting under the SUV's lights, its warehouses sagging under decades of neglect. Nia slammed the brakes, the vehicle skidding to a stop beside a manhole, its cover pocked with age. Ray leapt out, prying it open with a crowbar, the metal groaning as it gave way. "Down here," he said, his voice muffled through a scarf he'd tied over his mouth. Nia pulled Jade from the car, her daughter's steps faltering, and they descended, the ladder slick with grime, the air below damp but clear of the mist. Ray followed, sealing the hatch, and they moved through a tunnel, its concrete walls echoing. Their footsteps, water dripping in steady plops. Nia's Glock stayed raised, her eyes darting for threats, her wounds screaming with every step. She'd lost Lena, her team, her city, but Jade was alive, and that fueled her. They reached the bunker, a steel door buried in the tunnel's end, its keypad glowing faintly. Nia punched in the code, her fingers steady despite the blood slicking. Them, a sequence burned into her from years of drills. The lock clicked, the door hissing open, and they stepped into a cavern lit by emergency strips, its shelves stacked with crates. She tore one open, revealing vials of clear liquid, their labels stark. Neutralizer X7. Her chest eased, a flicker of hope igniting. "This'll stop it," she said, handing Ray a stack, her voice firm. "Get it to the vents. Spread it fast." He nodded, slinging a bag over his shoulder, and bolted back up, his boots pounding the ladder. Nia filled a syringe, jabbing it into Jade's arm, then her own, the sting sharp but fleeting. Her lungs cleared, the burn fading, and Jade's breathing steadied, her eyes meeting Nia's with fragile trust. They climbed out, the mist thinning as Ray's crew, summoned via burner phones, hit the streets, vials shattering into sewer grates, the antidote spreading in invisible waves. Sirens wailed closer, federal choppers dropping lower, their spotlights piercing the haze. Nia drove Jade to a safe house Marcus had secured, a brick tenement on the city's edge, its windows boarded, its silence a balm after the carnage. Crowds gathered downtown, their coughs easing, their cheers rising as the mist dissolved, news feeds flipping to praise. "Carter's antidote saves Carverton," an anchor declared, her voice awed. The president called, his baritone warm through, a secure line. "You're a hero again, Nia. Nation owes you." She stood in the safe house, Jade asleep on a cot, her chest swelling with relief. She'd neutralized the toxin, turned Grayson's horror into salvation. She'd assumed she'd won, that the nightmare was over. She'd never been more wrong. The door creaked and Jade stirred, her voice soft. "Mom." Nia turned, smiling faintly, but her daughter's eyes weren't warm. They were cold, glinting with something dark, and Nia's gut twisted as Jade stood, pulling a pistol from under the blanket, its barrel steady in her small hands. "Jade?" Nia whispered, her heart lurching, her Glock still holstered, her mind reeling. Jade's lips curled, a smirk Nia had never seen, and her voice was a blade. "You thought you'd beat them, Mom. You're so blind." Nia's knees weakened, her breath catching as Jade stepped closer, the gun unwavering. "What are you saying?" she rasped, dread coiling in her chest. Jade laughed, a sharp, hollow sound that echoed in the cramped room. "I've been with Grayson all along. Planted the memo, fed the lies, you were my ticket up." Nia's world tilted, her daughter's words a sledgehammer to her soul. Jade, her baby, trained in secret to hack, to fight, had turned it against her. "Why?" Nia choked, her voice breaking, her hands trembling as she raised them, palms out. Jade's smirk widened, her eyes glinting with triumph. Power, Mom. You had it. But you're weak. Grayson saw my potential, made me his shadow. I framed you. Every step, and now I'm taking your place. Nia's mind flashed to the rooftop, Jade's broadcast saving her, a ploy she'd swallowed whole. It wasn't rescue. It was theater, a setup to seize Homeland Security's helm. You're my daughter? Nia pleaded, tears stinging her eyes. I fought for you. Jade's face hardened, her finger tightening on the trigger. You fought for yourself. I'm done being your shadow. The shot rang out, a deafening crack, and pain exploded in Nia's chest, her body slamming back against the wall. Blood bloomed hot and wet, soaking her shirt as she slid to the floor, her vision blurring. Jade loomed over her, her smirk unwavering, her voice a whisper. Homeland Security's mine now. Thanks for the ladder, Mum. Nia's hands scrabbled for her Glock, but her strength ebbed, her fingers slick with blood, her breath a ragged gasp. She'd saved Carverton, beaten Grayson's poison, thought she'd reclaimed her life. Now, staring into Jade's cold eyes, she saw the truth. Her daughter had flipped every victory into a betrayal, the racist system's final knife twisted by her own blood. Jade turned, her boots clicking on the floor as she strode to the door, the pistol dangling at her side. They'll mourn you, she said, glancing back, her tone mockingly soft. The hero who fell, I'll make sure of it. Nia's vision darkened, her chest heaving as blood pooled beneath her, her mind screaming against the end. She'd fought cops, militias, a city's hate, only to lose to the one she'd loved most. Jade, she croaked, her voice a dying whisper, you'll burn for this. Her daughter paused, her smirk flickering, then vanished into the night, the door slamming shut. Nia's head lolled, her eyes glazing as the room faded, her last breath a curse on Jade's name, on the system that had birthed this monster. Carverton woke to silence, the mist gone, the antidote's miracle hailed across the nation. News feeds mourned Nia, their anchors somber, their screens flashing her badge, her face. A hero gunned down, one said, her voice thick with tears. Suspect unknown. Jade stood in a DC office, her hair pulled back, her suit crisp. Accepting her appointment as Homeland Security's head, her eyes dry, her smile practiced. The president shook her hand, his baritone warm. Your mother's legacy lives in you, he said, oblivious to the blood on her fingers. Jade nodded, her gaze steady, power hers at last. Nia's body lay cold, her fight ended, her victories, ashes in her daughter's hands. She'd assumed she'd triumphed, that love would hold. Now dead by Jade's bullet, she'd lost everything, the racist rot claiming its final twisted win. This gripping tale of Nia Carter reveals profound truths about resilience, betrayal, and the pervasive reach of systemic racism. First, it underscores the relentless courage required to confront injustice. Nia, a black woman at the pinnacle of power, faced brutal discrimination from corrupt cops, yet fought back with unwavering determination, showing that strength isn't just physical, but rooted in purpose. Her journey teaches us that standing up, even when the odds are stacked against, you can spark change, though it comes at a cost. Second, the story exposes the fragility of trust. Nia's ultimate downfall came not from external foes, but from Jade, her own daughter, revealing how betrayal can strike deepest from those closest to us. It's a stark reminder to guard our vulnerabilities, even in victory. Finally, it lays bare the insidious nature of racism, woven into institutions and individuals alike, twisting justice into a weapon against the innocent. Nia's battle wasn't just against Hollis and Vance, but a system that enabled their hate, proving that true reform demands dismantling more than surface corruption. What hits hardest? For me, it's the tragic irony. Nia saved a city only to lose everything to the very forces she fought. So what do you think? Can justice ever triumph over such betrayal? Drop a comment below, hit like if this moved you, subscribe for more powerful tales, and share to spread the fight for truth. Thanks for joining this journey. May you find strength to face your own battles and hope in the darkest moments.